time, deep down inside, you prefer, being by yourself most of the time, I would say, right? Reading and quiet time and things like that.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
For sure. And like I was hanging out with Scott and Kate Sinclair. I mean, he's been my friend forever, and they were over at our house Friday night, and it was seriously pushing midnight, and I was not sick of their visit at all. But that's because I'm not in unfamiliar territory. That's what affects introverts. Is I'm not scared of those situations. They don't make me nervous. I'm not socially inept or anything like that. It's just that drains me. But being around people that I know, that's not draining. Now I will say though that there are definitely times when I do feel drained and I just want everybody to go home, sort of thing. But for the most part, the hourglass is a lot larger with people I know well. So
yeah. I know sometimes we've had company over. This doesn't happen too often, but if they're more like Sarah's friends, like when it's like pushing like 11 or 11:30, I just go to bed.
Yeah.
She gets a little pissed, but I mean, guests have to realize that if it's approaching 11 or 11:30, most people are shutting down at that time, and I didn't have the balls to say, all right, guys, time to leave. They really weren't my friends, but at the same time, I couldn't just sit there with my eyes wide open, faking it. I had to go to bed.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Yeah. Now, so you said those are her friends.
Yeah, it's only happened a few times, and they were mostly her friends, maybe from work when she used to work somewhere else, and it was fun. I enjoyed the 4 hours they were there, but enough's enough.
Yeah.
I can only put up with so much.
Yeah, so. I would definitely agree. Like, now that would be a total asshole move if that was like your friends or both of y'all's friends. Like, y'all have to
no, if it was my friend,
together.
No, I would say, dude, it's time to go. It's been fun.
I would totally say this in front of her, but Kelly, before she was married, Kelly Craven, our cousin, she would come over and hang out, and I would literally have to say, hey, Kelly, like, you have to go home now. We're going to bed. And she wouldn't get up, so I would just, like it was, we were all laughing. She wasn't being jerky. I wasn't being jerky. Right. But I started turning lights off, and I was like, okay, you sit your ass here in the dark. That's fine, but I'm going to bed, and Priscilla, you're getting up now, too.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, this is Joey, and I'm trying to figure out who my favorite sprinkle is. Preston. He's a guy that I call friend. He's an author. He's a cool guy to be around. But even though I don't know Aaron Sprinkle that well, I've met him a couple times. Hey, Aaron Sprinkle lived through my high school years. He actually was around for my junior year, my senior year, as I was listening to Poor Ol' Lou all the way through modern day, as I'm still listening to his stuff. So it's like, huh.
And let's not forget about his badass drummer brother.
That's right.
Jesse Sprinkle.
That's right, who I've never met at all. Right. So he's not in the equation for me, but I think you have a bromance with him. So you're Jared.
I love drummers, man.
You're Jared drummers. With the bromance of Jesse Sprinkle, and this is the Pastor with No Answers. Yeah, so it is kind of crazy if you think about how there are people that are a part of your life that they will never know what capacity they are a part of your life. Like, think about it. Like, somebody's voice, like an album that you've listened to hundreds of times, that person's voice has an impact on your life, brings back certain memories, and they have no idea. Here's an interesting thought that I have pondered before out loud, maybe even on this podcast. That's unfortunate if that's the case. Sorry, everybody. But imagine, like, think about the fact that when I listen to an album, so when I listen to Hard to Find a Friend by Page of the Line, I'm hearing it in a completely unique way. Nobody is listening to that album like I'm listening to it. It's a very unique album as it goes through my ears because it brings back a certain time period with certain life circumstances, and nobody else hears it that way. I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. And it's the same with any kind of art. I mean, you go to art, you observe art, experience art, and you do it through your own life story. So yeah, I mean that's I think that's a very powerful, profound statement. Is that we all encounter art. We also encounter each other in very unique ways. So yeah.
Are you still big into visual art, or I don't even know? Is that what you call it? Like paintings and stuff? Is that visual art?
Yeah, I mean, when you say big into it, when I go to museums, I really appreciate what I'm looking at.
Right.
I love it, but in terms of being big into it, no. I mean, I really enjoyed studying it in college, and I really appreciate it. It's just I'm not in that scene. I tell you this though, whenever there's really interesting exhibits passing through Boca Raton, I will go to see those exhibits,
Yeah.
and I really enjoy them. I would love to go to the MoMA in New York.
The
That would
what?
be the Museum of Modern Art.
Oh,
MoMA.
gotcha.
I mean, I would take a whole day for that. I would really like that. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't get to see or experience art the way I'd want to. You know, it's very infrequently right now.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. All right, well, we shot the breeze enough about being an introvert. It is kind of crazy that we have two introverted parents. Typically, I see married couples that one's an introvert and one's an extrovert, but every now and then you've got two of the same, and you're asking for an unbalanced lifestyle if you think about it.
right.
I mean, seriously, because you don't
Yeah.
have one person saying, "Hey, seriously, come on, we need to go hang out and everything." It's just both of them are like, who cares? Let's just stay home."
Exactly. Yep.
All right, well, we got Preston Sprinkle here today. We're going to be talking about the current state of church. We'll chew the fat a little bit about Perry Noble and the things that have transpired with him. Crazy stuff. He's got some interesting thoughts, and he's written some interesting books. So here you go, Preston Sprinkle. All right,
Yes.
so we got Preston Sprinkle on here, a familiar voice on the Bad Christian podcast, and this makes number 2 on Pastor with No Answers. It's a privilege. Preston definitely increases the intelligence on this call. So here's how this podcast episode came about. Preston listens on and off to Bad Christian podcast, and we've done a couple episodes on there called Death of a Sermon, where we just really talked through what we see as some problems with the church that we actually love and that we're a part of the problem, part of the good stuff, and piqued his interest, and he even expressed some interest to talk it through a little bit more. And so I was like, yeah, let's do that on here. Before we do that, and I do think that there is some tie-in to this conversation, and this will be coming out a little bit later than this news just breaking. But as we record right now, yesterday at New Spring Church, 30,000 member church, they announced that their senior pastor, Perry Noble, was being fired, had to do with alcohol, bad decisions in his marriage. They made clear that people knew it was not infidelity, not abuse towards his wife. But when I hear something like this, now my mind actually goes not to how could someone like Perry Noble let that happen. Why didn't he have accountability in place? I mean, first of all, the three of us, we would all agree nobody is surprised that Perry Noble messed up. I mean, nobody should be surprised that anybody has messed up, because that's the playing field that we're all on. We are all susceptible of making mistakes. I think what we should be surprised, disappointed, let down, and motivated to change something is that the system failed him. Now, he's a part of that system, and he's a part of creating it, but still, we, the people that make up the church, we fail these pastors by putting them in this sort of position. I'll start here.
What position is that, though? Just to be clear.
On a pedestal. So let me give you an example. A pastor that I respect with all my heart, think he's a great guy. I've learned a lot from him. He recently said something along the lines of, leaders should actually discount themselves from being able to do stuff that other people can do. So he's not talking about moral stuff, because that would be crazy. So a pastor, you shouldn't look at porn, but your congregants can. He's talking more along the lines of, pastors, you may not be able to drink in public where your congregants should be able to. that's just one example of many, but that's putting the pastors on a separate pedestal. We don't belong on a separate one. We belong on the same one, and we should be able to say, look, I'm with you guys. I'm rubbing shoulders with you guys. It just so happens that my job for some reason is to lead this church. Now, I trust that God is going to give me the tools to be able to do that specific part of this job, but I'm not distinct from you guys. I'm not any different. I have the same challenges, the same potential for mess ups. And so let's just keep this conversation going and let's keep open. And you guys challenge me as I'm challenging you and that sort of thing. So that's what I mean by I think the system has failed. So what's your first reactions, Preston, when you hear something like this?
I don't understand. I mean, just to go back a bit, this is going to be either embarrassing or maybe telling, I don't know, but I literally didn't even know who Perry Noble was until he was on your show.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, Bad Christian introduced me to Perry Noble.
Right.
So I don't, and then the second time I heard his name was, you let me know yesterday, hey, he just got fired. So I read about 30 seconds of an article, maybe 2 minutes of an article. And I guess what the bewildering question in my mind is, it said that he has been struggling with overuse of alcohol and has some kind of marriage. His marriage isn't, quite perfect, whatever. And I'm like, well, what? Who doesn't that apply to?
Yeah.
Like that. He's not saying I'm a drunk and I'm proud of it, and don't you tell me not to drink. I don't think he's saying that. He's not saying, hey, I'm beating the crap out of my wife and that's just wanting me to keep. He's not. It seems like he's struggling with some very, sins that the large swath of humanity within the church is struggling with, if not more. I mean, if somebody walked into your community group and said, hey guys, man, I drank too much last night and I haven't been loving my wife the way I should. When people say like, oh, you need to quit your job as a banker. Like you need to, like, I don't, this is where I don't understand. Maybe there's a lot more to it that they're not revealing. I think that's a very good chance. Or there, like you said, there's this very unhealthy system where pastors aren't allowed to struggle with sin so that when they struggle, they can't tell anybody because their job's on the line.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So you're basically saying either New Spring is a little too legalistic and hardcore with their expectations for their leaders, or there's just got to be more to the story.
Yeah, I mean, and from what I heard about Perry Noble and New Spring from your show, it's he goes out of his way to say, I am who I am. I'm not perfect. I want the perfect. Like, here's a church that's actually trying to reverse that kind of like senior pastor pedestal model. And if they can't do it right, like that's really discouraging. Or like you said, the other option is that there's a lot more going on, and that's always tricky. I mean, in my more cynical moments, I want to say, well, of course there's more. Like they're only gonna only gonna give us the very basic what we need to hear. I've been in churches. You're in a church. I mean, that generally speaking, I mean, 9 times out of 10 people say a lot less than is actually going on. But again, I don't want to make a judgment call there.
And there could be different kinds of struggle too. I mean, he could be struggling in a humble, repentant way, or he can be struggling in a very dismissive way, and that's what we don't know.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, he definitely did not heed the warnings of the elders and pastors, but that doesn't necessarily mean he did it in a rebellious way. It could have just been he just kept messing up, saying, "Guys, I'm sorry. I just keep going down this same road," and finally they're just like, okay, we just can't do it anymore. But yeah, I would imagine it was probably, and here's what I want to ask you guys is, they said any more information, to tickle everybody's ears with some gossip, they said, is not helpful at this time. That's the thing that stumps me. And we've talked this inside out, on Bad Christian. I think all of us, that rubs us the wrong way, and it's just because, wait a second, if there's 30,000 people following this guy, and he's been talking every single Sunday morning, and people have been listening to him, and they've been hearing the good stories and the bad stories, and hearing this scripture and that scripture, and how this meant something to him, and this one meant something. It's like, wait a second. So when you mess up, we're not gonna go any further. I mean, we're not gonna be more open. And here's what I would say is, sure, from a humanistic standpoint, team humanity. Okay, that makes sense. Let's just honor the guy. Let's not embarrass him. It's none of everybody's business. But it's like, wait a second, though. This is like the gospel here. This is the church. This is we should be radical with our transparency, and if we're more open with our struggles, which means I believe even more specific, it just seems like Jesus gets more glory. People are less intimidated by the Christian walk because they're just like, wow, I mean, this dude messed up in this specific area. I mean, do you guys disagree with them needing to be more open?
What do you think, Jared? I got some thoughts. I'd love to hear yours, though.
I think that transparency is the way to go. And I think in a situation like this, I think you're absolutely right. He has 30,000 people tuning in every single week. They're invested in the church. They're invested in this guy. So to be mysterious about it doesn't do anyone any good.
Yeah.
And so I think the fact that he is in that position, he needs to be more public and in a situation. And I think that can help him as well as his congregation. It will help the healing process, the process of reconciliation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would, for the most part, I think I agree with that. I think we definitely need more transparency. I guess the one I've kind of thought about kind of specifics, and once you get into some details, I can see a tipping point to where giving just explicit visual details of whatever could be counterproductive. I mean, if I was like struggling with masturbation and I'm a pastor,
right,
like should I really say, hey guys, sorry man, but last night I was totally just jerking off, and is that the 16-year-old girl sitting in the congregation, like, is that helpful transparency, or is that like, does she need to be picturing me in that, or even in a positive way? Like, I don't. I mean, your buddy Mark Driscoll. I mean,
we're tight, dude. We're tight.
I mean, when his series on Song of Solomon and let me say, I listened to a few parts of that, so I don't know the details. So let me just forget about him. Let me just say, if I were to give, a bunch of sermons on Song of Songs, should I go into detail about like oral sex and how my wife and I, we engaged this and this is awesome and Song of Songs commands it, and all of a sudden people are looking at my wife saying, whoa, like,
dang, she's hot in bed.
Like, I don't know if that image is actually helpful, even though I do think we should talk about sex very freely and in some ways explicitly, but I do think there is a tipping point to where I think it could be counterproductive, though.
But I think in a situation like this, though, where it's so egregious, according to the board, they feel like they have to fire the guy. I think that's where you have to sort of, be transparent. It doesn't have to be every minute detail or excruciating detail, but just let us know the nature of it, and that way there won't be this gossip mill running. You can just kind of nip that in the bud by just being honest.
Yeah. It's almost like, Jared, would this suffice? Hey, Perry Noble, he has actually regularly been getting drunk, and he has admitted to this. We've told him to stop. He's also been spending way too much time pastoring this church. His wife feels like she doesn't even have a husband. This has gone on for 2 years. Like, are those the sort of details that you think would be healthy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would put to rest any kind of gossip or anything like that.
Yeah, and Preston, I wonder if this is not a different level of transparency as much as it's when it's sexual. We want to be a little different, because those are some good points. I mean, do we really want that out there? Those visuals and stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree. In this case, I think, man, let's just say I was Perry Noble and I failed in whatever he did, and I said, you know what, guys, I've had an ongoing 2-year battle with alcohol.
Yeah.
I get drunk once or twice a week. I've tried to stop. I really want help, but man, I'm not fit to pastor this church while I'm kind of in the middle of this struggle.
Right.
The church thought it was best for me to get rid of me, and even transparency to the point of like, you know what, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. We're working through that as elders. Just trust that we're going to try and work through that. But that's exactly what's gone. I'm all for that kind of transparency. I think, and then, for 25% of the congregation that's also doing the same thing, it gives them the courage to say, you know what, dude, I'm right there with you, man. Let's do this together, So I think I'm all for that.
All right, let me throw a fictional scenario at you. You get a phone call in 30 minutes and someone says, hey, I'm executive pastor at New Spring Church, and God laid it on our heart. We want you to come in 2 Sundays and address our people. We just really feel like God is stirring our hearts to ask you to do it. We don't know why. Like outside of, I mean, obviously you would begin to seek the Lord and be like, whoa, what the heck is going on? But from a just what's your first reaction to that? Like, what would you say to these people?
Twice a month?
No. Just a one-time deal.
I'd first of all say, well, how do I get a portion of noble salary? I'm just like 25%, just one Sunday. And then once I fall out of my chair and racing to say yes,
you're not jaded. Cut it out.
I love when you guys when he was when he was talking about how transparent he is or whatever. That I think it was you or Matt jumped in and said, "So what's your salary?"
Right.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was Matt. That was a classic Matt question. Hey, I was telling Jared, and this could be completely. Never mind. I don't need to go there. I apologize. And you know what, Jared? Don't edit that. We're gonna leave our listeners in suspense. Maybe we'll share it eventually. So, what would you say?
Man, I would. Well, first of all, I mean, I've got such limited knowledge. I would say I need to get as much knowledge as I can of what's going on, what's brewing in the congregation. But I don't know. I've been a big fan of Grace recently, and just
that's good. Me too, man.
Yeah, well, I think you look at. I mean, the so-called heroes of the Bible are just. I mean, if we followed some of these guys, we'd end up in prison. I mean, David, like one of the best. Like, here's one of our best guys. Well, he lusted after one of his best friend's wife, got him hammered so that he would have sex with her to get her pregnant to cover up the adultery that he committed. Then when that didn't work, he got him killed. Like Personally, I've never met somebody as sinful as David.
Right.
Like, I'm sure they're out there, but I've never actually met another human being that killed one of his best friends so that he can marry his wife that he already had an affair with. That's really bad, and yet God used him to turn the world upside down as the line of the Messiah and the man after my own heart. And I feel like we are so much more broken than we realize. Or that maybe we realize, but we're scared to have other people realize. And I would just want to liberate people to not celebrate the brokenness, but to embrace it so that they can celebrate the solution to that brokenness, which is Jesus Christ. And I feel like millennials are trying to do that a little better. But I still feel like, man, we got a long way to go. I just feel like we have a long way to go in that.
Yeah.
So that'd be my message.
and what is your book that you wrote on Grace? What's that called again?
Thanks for that softball. Appreciate it. It's called.
Hey, I put a softball on a tee for you.
It's called Charis with a CH. Charis, God's scandalous grace for us.
Awesome.
And it talks about all that stuff. So.
Yeah. And hey, people have heard me say this before, and I feel like I need to say it every time we have you on. But I definitely think you have written to date, and this is obviously an ignorant statement because I've only read probably 3 books about homosexuality from a Christian perspective, but yours has got to be one of the best. It's called People to Be Loved, and it's just awesome. And I think what makes it so special is that you still maintain a belief that from what you gather from the Bible, it's a sinful lifestyle, but it has got to be the most pro gay book I've ever read in my life with that standpoint. I mean, it's definitely a must read. All right, so let's
appreciate that.
Man. So let's talk about the church. And I know your time is limited, so let's just do some popcorn here. Just touch on a bunch of different things, but. Do we need a daggum sermon every single week? The sort of preparation that goes into that from pastors, the sort of dependency that people have on it, the fact that nobody remembers it 2 weeks later, usually, it's like this thing that is a part of church culture that people just say, no, it's got to be there. Does it have to be there?
So I've got so many thoughts on this. Most of them are rough draft thoughts. So let me just think out loud here. Here's my initial thought on the initial response is it really depends on the preacher the context, the need, the congregation.
Yeah.
I don't want to say categorically no, but I think that you can be I think there's a lot of people who are gifted at teaching. I think there's very, very few people who are gifted at teaching who are gifted at delivering monologues. For instance, Martin Luther King Jr. ignited massive societal disruptive movements largely through monologues. He has a gift of giving a monologue that the rhetorical power is so great that it actually does produce waves of societal action.
Yeah.
Very, very, I would say 5% of preachers that I listen to have that same sort of monological gift, and I don't know. I don't listen to a lot of pastors or preachers or whatever, but I mean, maybe like an Andy Stanley or a Matt Chandler or Chan, or I know a lot of no-name people that I'm like, man, this guy, when he speaks, man, it's moving people. But I would say, no, I don't think that to be a pastor of a church that delivering a monologue, every single Sunday, whether you have a word or not from the Lord,
Right.
In the Old Testament, people spoke when they had a word from the Lord. Now you're required to do it every Sunday at 9. That's I think that is cultural. I think it's traditional. I don't think it's necessary or even that effective. I think that pastors should weigh the needs of the congregation, their own giftedness, and even the needs of the moment. I feel like last Sunday here, in light of devastating events this week in society, right, I think it probably would have been or was extremely odd for churches that have, say, less than 100 people to get together and not get in a massive circle and say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about race and
right,
violence and hate and what's everybody's thinking about this. For us to show up on Sunday and get a monologue about, Matthew 10 or whatever, it's just weird. Like, who does that,
right,
know?
Yeah.
Got a lot more stuff, but I've been talking a lot.
No, totally. I mean, think about this. Like, we, basically communicate, hey, come on Sundays, and then also be in a small group. That's kind of how churches operate, and they really do highlight, hey, small groups are important. If you just do the Sunday morning thing, then that's an incomplete picture. But I would go so far as to say, well, you know what? People are stubborn. They're not doing the small group thing, so every other Sunday, or hey, let's just start with one Sunday a month. When people come, they're sitting in round tables and everybody's talking. And you know what?
Yeah.
There's going to be a huge percentage of people that are just like, I ain't going back when they do that. But at least that church is saying, you know what? We got to change something, because it's just, the consumer mentality of, I'm going to go and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen. Which, let me ask you guys this. I have a weird theory. My theory is that there's some things that God has allowed because he knows we're a fallen world, and maybe some of my theology can be corrected. We'll do that later. But, for example, people were allowed to divorce. It wasn't God's original will, but hey, through, Moses' law, you can do that. It doesn't seem like God destroyed a bunch of people for polygamy, so maybe that was allowed for a season, just because God's like, this is fallen. These people are sexual and horny and all that stuff, and we're just not going to deal with that right now. Could how the church is set up right now, could that potentially be a part of the fall? In other words, God knew that these massive churches were going to be built. Thousands of people were going to be drawn to him. That's not the picture perfect model. That's not what he originally geared up for. But he's like, you know what? People are stupid, and that's what we have to do right now. Is use this particular model.
Well, I don't think that anything that man does is going to be picture perfect.
Right.
We're all jacked, but I think what you have to do with mega churches or just the church structure is look at the fruits. So in the community that church serves, if you're seeing fruits of that ministry, then I think that's what God wants.
Right.
If you're not seeing any fruits, that's not what God wants.
Right.
So I think it's all about the fruits of that particular church in that particular context.
Right. Well, I guess how I would respond to that, though, is I think every church, for the most part, with some exceptions, I think almost every church can point to some fruit. But so everybody can say, we do some stuff. But my biggest, the thing that causes me to maybe lose some sleep at night is, was the gospel ever supposed to be contained by people needing to get paid, by building mortgages needing to be paid, by the system needing to be maintained? And let me just state clearly, I work at a megachurch. I respect the leadership. I really do believe that God works a lot of good out. And I've been open with these sorts of concerns, even within our church. But it just seems like, I don't know if some of our teachers would admit this or not, but I do think that they are somewhat limited with what they can get up and say on a Sunday morning, because they know, hey, if I'm this open or if I'm this direct with certain things that people do need to hear, we could lose a lot of people, and that wouldn't be good for our system.
Yeah, I think the entire system has significant problems that are all interconnected. I think the money piece you hit on is huge. I mean, we as a church, and look, I know a lot of pastors that say, I'm not a numbers guy, I care about faithfulness, not just growing or whatever. The second the church starts growing, they get excited. How's church going? Oh, we're growing, we're doing this. And I'm like, where are these people coming from? Just the church down the street? Like, well, I don't know, but our church is growing. It's and then, the church gets bigger, and then you hire more people, and then you hire more people, and the church is growing. And then you're more pressure to put on this, I would say largely performance driven service, because that's generally, I mean, how many people are attracted to the church that has nothing to do with the quality of service? It's the Sunday service that draws people. And then all of a sudden you have so much riding on the financial maintenance of the church that does dictate decisions.
Yeah.
If you make a decision, it's like, well, if all we did is lead worship with an acoustic guitar for an entire year and sold our sound system and gave the money to the poor, like, well, gosh, I don't know. Like, a lot of people wouldn't like that and they would leave. Well, if a sound system was keeping people there, then that's the problem with the system we've created.
Right.
And I think, again, if they said, like, hey, you know what, instead of a sermon, we're going to do discussions, or we're going to go feed the homeless this Sunday instead of doing a sermon, and next week we'll do a sermon, like, you're probably going to lose people. I know a church that, well, yeah, I won't even go there, but
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My question is, guys, have there been studies where people are actually asked why they go to church? There's like a breakdown of why people go to church, their motivations for it.
That's so a lot of my thoughts on church are stemming from there was a little backstory, I guess. The Barna Group did a massive study on the state of discipleship in the church, and then Navigators hired me to write a book responding to that study, and that's coming out in a couple months. So it's on kind of what's the state of discipleship in the church today. So that I would say that's the closest. I think that specific question, there's like a 100-page study that was done, so I don't know if that specific question was there, but a lot of what I found was just kind of cliched religious language that lacks concrete Jesus reality. Like, people say, why do you go to church? And, well, I go because I want to get closer to Jesus. Well, what does that mean? Like,
yes.
What? Jesus was crucified by the state for treason. He was single and homeless and a peasant. Like, is that, if you saw him on the side of the road, you would run. Like, so what Jesus are you trying to get closer to? You know, like, what is that? I want to grow. I want to grow in my faith. Yeah. But I don't want too many black people at church. Like, it's just, there's this spiritual lingo that people just, it's like you tap their knee and it's this knee-jerk reaction. They spit out spiritual lingo. And I think we need to cut through a lot of that and say, what's really going on here? Because when I talk to people, they're disconnected, they're isolated, they're struggling with all kinds of addictions and things related to, being isolated, not being connected. And I'm like, what? Yeah. If we're not experiencing some level of authentic, rich community, then what are we doing? Like that's kind of like Church 101, right? Yeah,
it's almost like a pruning that needs to happen, and pruning obviously isn't good for how a tree or a bush or something looks, because you cut it back so much. But it seems like there needs to be some difficult decisions made that is going to, at first, potentially have negative effects on attendance, potentially cause some layoffs. But it starts a new system in place, because here's the thing is, this system has been in place for a very long time, as far as people finding a church that they like, a church that they're going to feel super comfortable in, a church that they feel like they're receiving what they need to receive, a church where they like the music. And it's just also, this is centered around me. And here, the tragic element in all this is, that's what we taught them to do. We taught them to do this by giving them these, perks, and having really awesome special effects, and having this, performance driven sort of worship and all that sort of thing. So it's like we've led them to be this way, and it's just not healthy, So now when people come to church, we can't basically say, hey, here's what real Christianity is all about, because we're demonstrating something completely different by, how we carry out church business,
Yeah, that's good.
Now, do you think? Go ahead, Jared.
Do you think that our cultural context will be ripe for change as the baby boomers start fading away? Like the millennials and the Generation Xers,
I mean,
will be more
I think so.
embracing of these ideas.
Yeah. Do you know Dan Kimball? That name, Dan Kimball.
Yes,
he's written a bunch of books. So in his, he's got a book. I think it's titled like "They Love Jesus but Not the Church" or something like that. He interviewed a ton of people that were church, de-church, just random people, and asked them, "What do you wish church was like?" Unanimously, he said, almost 100% people said, "I wish that church was more than just a sermon. I wish that it was a discussion. I love the Bible. I love Jesus. I want to know about the Bible, but I learn better through discussion. If I just sit there passively, somebody talks at me, and then we close in prayer and go, I don't learn that way."
Yeah.
And here's what's odd. In our culture today, the primary avenues of information almost always allow for some sort of interaction and response. You read a blog, you drop a comment. Facebook post, you comment. Twitter, you comment.
Right.
News articles, you comment. YouTube videos, you comment. Then you show up at church. It's really one of the last social environments where somebody can get up and talk and nobody else can say anything. Like, it's just, there's no avenue to respond. And I don't know what this would look like in a church of 500 people, 1,000 people. Maybe that's a problem. But to just sit there and passively listen. This is what resonated when you guys talked about the depth of the sermon. I was just so resonated. I'm like, this is just, it's just like, peeking outside the church walls and looking at the way people are functioning in culture. Like, it's just like, well, yeah, of course this can't sustain itself.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading a book called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's really good. And they talked about how in some of the cultures, and I don't know if it was in the biblical cultures, but there's not even a word for privacy. Like, privacy is such a Western, deal. And this was just so eye-opening. They said almost everything that happened in the church and back in those times, it was in community. And they said that we have quiet times and personal devotion times escalated at such a high level.
Yeah.
And that is cultural. Like, and that to me just like kind of rocked my world a little bit. I was like, wait a second, I've always been told, have your quiet times. And I'm not bashing quiet times. I think they are pretty helpful, but to see them as essential things that you need to be doing in order to grow. Epistles were written to house churches. They read them together. People prayed together. The Holy Spirit started the church with a group of people. I mean, everything is in the context of groups. So, I think what you just shared that people are expressing is pretty innate, and also just the direction that God is trying to get people to go. Would you make a black and white issue on I know we're taking a sharp turn here, but when it comes to like $1 million buildings and huge facilities and millions of dollars put into sound systems and all that stuff, I always speak on behalf of these churches by saying, you know what, say what you want to say, but when tragedy strikes, these churches that bring in millions and millions of dollars are able to give millions and millions of dollars. And I know for a fact that, the church that I go to, they're able to respond with big bucks, whereas a house church wouldn't be able to as much. So that's my biggest argument for building the big buildings that attract people. Outside of that, I'm just like, are we supposed to be doing that? Like, where do you stand with that, Preston? I mean, do you see it as black and white or not so much?
No, not black and white. I do. I probably read maybe 2 sentences from Rick Warren and maybe heard half a message. But I remember him saying at some context that, you have the big church, the medium church, and the small house church, and each one plays a role that other ones can't play. And I guess I would still stand by that. I would say this though, that it is striking that the let's just say the New Testament talks a lot about giving.
Yeah.
A lot about generosity. It hardly ever even mentions giving towards non-people, like even ministries or organizations or buildings, there's a massive push for wealthier people within the body to help poor people within the body.
Yeah.
And I'm not anti big church or big expenses necessarily. I do think that our whole mindset of giving does not reflect New Testament Christianity. I mean, I think the so-called benevolence. You guys have benevolence, like usually it's like 1% of your budget. I feel like benevolence should be 80% of the budget.
Right. Right.
And maybe there's space for a building here and there, or whatever. But yeah, man, it's hard. I would need to be convinced otherwise that our massive expenditures are not more of a reflection of our consumer-driven professional Western culture than they are biblical values. And I say that's a general statement. I'm not going to say that. That's awesome. And I have no sort of pushback against, your mega church giving tons of money away to the poor or whatever. I would say this, and I've already mentioned his name once, so this is going to sound like I'm a groupie. I've listened to probably 3 Francis Chan sermons, read half a book. I'm not actually. He's a friend of.
You wrote a book with him. It's okay.
No. But my point is, I'm not like a Chan's, like the Protestant Pope or whatever. He's a friend of mine, and
you have a crush on him. It's okay, dude. It's a safe place.
What he's doing in San Francisco is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
He's establishing a network of house churches that have gone from 1 church to 2 churches to 4 churches to now 8 churches. Each church has 2 pastors. People are getting saved. Ex-cons are becoming pastors. People are being discipled. They're learning the scriptures like crazy. They're out witnessing. He's seeing people grow in their faith like crazy. You know how much that costs?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's unbelievable.
And I'm not saying, and I know the cynical side of me wants to say, well, yeah, it's Francis Chan. I visited one of those churches. You know what Chan did? He sat in the corner and listened, and halfway through the gathering, he got up and went and taught the 4-year-olds in the other room. Yep. He didn't say, so it's not like it's carried by Francis Chan, but his whole point is, look, how much does it cost for a bunch of spirit-filled believers to gather together like Acts 2, to pray, to drink wine, break bread, and learn the apostolic teaching? That shouldn't. How much does that cost?
Right.
Well, according to our current model, it's incredibly expensive. Like, you can't just do that without a lot of money.
Right.
I just convince me that should be that expensive. Like, I just don't think it needs to be that expensive. Let me just close with I'm not an anti-building guy. I just think we need to think incredibly critically about how much we're spending money on things that aren't really producing disciples.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we're definitely looking at that in depth with Bad Christian, because we've got a lot of listeners spread out all over the world, and I think there's a lot of people that would invest into smaller communities, and I don't think it's far-fetched for us to help be a catalyst for some sort of interconnectedness. And you told me about what Chan was doing, and I read up on it and listened to his videos, and what's crazy is, I mean, first of all, I'll just say Francis Chan is way smarter, way more gifted, way better of a person than me. So in no way am I trying to put myself on his level. But a lot of the stuff that he was saying was like, oh, yeah, this is stuff that I've been thinking forever. And the next thought is, that's because the Holy Spirit is talking to people. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's
yeah.
So they're what you just described is what I can't get out of my head. So imagine those 7 or 8 groups, however many they are, imagine them all giving money and none of it goes to salaries or buildings or anything. It goes to needs within the group and needs in the community. I mean, complete fluid money. That's unbelievable. If you think about some of the people that are in those groups, I mean, I'm sure you have a doctor. I'm sure you have a teacher. I'm sure you have people that are bringing in 80,000, 30,000. Take 10% of that and what you can do if you're not having to support a system. You know?
Oh my God. I mean, they've probably sent out more full-time missionaries in these 8 house churches than a lot of mega churches. Like fully funded. Why? Because you take 5 or 10% of the income of, let's just say 150 people. That's a lot of stinking money that you could pour directly back into, things that are, again, directly like impacting people for the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. Jared, to further answer your question, I mean, I think we are already in a huge shift statistically, and I don't know how they pull out a stat like this, but I've heard it a bunch of times. 60% of Americans are never going to are never going to step into a church where, 50 years ago, a lot of people went to church, people that weren't Christians, people that didn't believe in God. Church was just something that the good people did. If you're respectable, you went to church, where 60% of people, even with an invite, they're not going to church. So what does that mean? That means that every single church that are functioning now on Sunday mornings are competing after 40% of the people. And if we truly care about the gospel getting out there, we'll say, okay, wait a second, we need a different model. We need to do what Francis Chan is doing, or we need to think through something, different than both of those, because 60% of people. And one thing that I've been really surprised since doing the Bad Christian podcast and interacting with a lot of people, there's a lot of Christians, and I'm not saying they're right for doing this. There's a lot of Christians that are just like, yeah, I just can't do this church thing anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's because what they're identifying as the church thing is the Sunday morning thing, and it just does nothing for them. And I think what happens, and I was in this camp too, you hear somebody that talks along those lines, and you kind of write them off as, well, you are a part of the church. You do need to be, whether you like it or not, you need to be a part of the help and stuff. But it's like, wait a second, we don't do that in the classroom. In the classroom, you have kids with a bunch of different learning styles. You have the auditory learners, you have the visual learners. Will you accommodate those students? You can't say to a Christian, well, wait a second, you have to like how we do things on Sunday mornings, or you have to give it a shot, or you have to be a part. No, for some people, it's okay. You don't have to like this. Now, to disregard the need for community, no, that's off, and you need to figure that out. To disregard the need to, read God's word and meditate on Scripture and pray and all that sort of thing, sure. Those are things that I think we should all fight for, but a certain model of doing church is crazy to say that everybody needs to be in.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that the number of that de-churched, like, I love Jesus, but I don't love the way we do church thing, that number is growing like crazy, man. Yeah. I mean, it is. And even people that aren't officially de-churched, I mean, I would consider myself in that guy. I feel like I'm tired and just, the way we do church, I'm like, I'm not impressed. It doesn't do much for me, Right. I mean, the church I was at on Sunday is an amazing service. It really was. Like, the worship was great. It was authentic. People were engaged. The preaching was amazing. The entire time, though, I sat there just mulling over the events this week, and I kind of thought, like, should we be out marching in the streets right now? Should we be bringing like gifts to the African American church down the street and say, I know there's been tensions this week, but we love you? Like, I wanted to leave church and go like find some, people, racial minorities, whatever, just like say, I just want to make an effort to like exemplify reconciliation somehow. Like, that was burning in me. Yeah. And I know for a lot of people, it's the same thing. They have a desire to do good in society, for social justice, for things that fall outside the walls of kind of the church programs or whatever. And rather than seeing those people as a nuisance, I think we need to empower them. We need to say, what can we do to do this? Can help you on your mission and to not put you in this little Christian box that we've been doing for so many years.
Yeah. Well, this will be an unpopular response, I'm sure, but I think this goes right back to the point of our system needs numbers It needs noses. It needs nickels. The reason why a church, especially if it was a sizable church or a church that, had buildings and paid people and all that sort of thing, if you start doing crazy stuff like that, like, hey, you know what? We're not meeting this Sunday. We're going to walk down the street. We're going to hold some signs saying, we love Black Lives Matter. We love all lives or scriptures or whatever. And then we're going to go give some gifts to this African-American church or something like that. Well, people would be uncomfortable. They'd get back into their cars. They'd be like, I don't want to do that. And oh my gosh, maybe some of them wouldn't come back the next Sunday. And, next thing you know, there's less money, there's less people. And I truly don't say that as a knock and as something that's jaded. I'm saying that's the system that I helped set up.
Here's the irony, Joey, though. I honestly think that if churches did that, I think a lot of them would actually double in numbers.
Yeah.
Because there's a hunger. There's a hunger for something like that. People want to be part of a cause that is deeply meaningful. I think if churches start taking risks like that, their congregation may look entirely different.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I just wonder if it's going to grow.
Yeah. Do you live near Francis Chan? Like, are you a part of those communities?
No, I live in Boise. He's in San Francisco.
Okay.
And we were actually going to start one of those communities here in Boise, and I literally was so. I just say yes to everything and try and do so much, so I had to put it on hold and say, nah, I just can't do that and everything else I'm doing. So
right,
yeah,
right. Awesome. Well, Preston, as always, man, you're like, I'm not just saying this. You're really good at these sort of things. It definitely add a lot, so I appreciate it. And let me throw up another softball for you. So PrestonSprinkle.com. They can check out all your books.
Got a brand new website, so definitely check out my website and all my books and stuff that are on there. And also, my podcast is Theology in the Raw, so subscribe to that. And you can get this every day.